Welcome to Now Playing Podcast Book Reviews. From fiction to nonfiction, graphic novels, and more, we're here to help you find something great to read. We hope you enjoy the show.
Well, hello, Now Playing readers. Believe it or not, this is your long-lost host, Stuart, stumbling back from the desert after a 7-year sabbatical, finally ready to complete my destiny as a reviewer of Frank Herbert's Duneverse. You heard me right. I'm talking Dune books today, and for the next 3 weeks here at Now Playing. And yes, I know, this is a movie review podcast. And yes, I know, Dune just had a new movie. Chapter 2 just been spooled in the IMAX theaters. I saw it today. I'm really excited to talk about it. All the hosts really want to be able to share their thoughts on this new exciting film. But that's not what I'm here today to do. Unfortunately, my co-host Arnie has experienced an unforeseen medical event, and part of his prescribed recovery is that he stay home. No movie theaters for a little while he regains his strength, and we want to support that here. We want to give him the time to heal. So my hope is that I can sustain your enthusiasm about Dune movies as I do this make good on Now Playing book review. Maybe folks don't even remember. I can't blame you if you don't. But we used to have this website specifically devoted to all things in print called Books and Nachos. And that was the place in cyberspace where I would go and talk about novels tied to movies that Now Playing was covering. Recently, we've rethought that strategy. Why send readers to a less trafficked site when we're having such fertile conversation here at nowplayingpodcast.com about franchises? So going forward, we started this in summer 2022. Whenever we want to talk books, we're going to do it here at the same place we talk movies. Co-host Jacob and I actually kicked it off by covering Stephenie Meyer Twilight Saga novels. I kid you not, it's real. Go look it up. We did that as Now Playing book review, and that's how we're going to address anytime the hosts want to cover books. That's what we're going to call those episodes. And you can also hear my podcast reviews of Dune. I started them at Books and Nachos way back in 2017. And they're still available. They're still out there at the other site. You can Google them if you're interested. Basically, the reason why I started that was that Jacob, Arnie, and I were in the middle of a David Lynch retrospective. And we were building up to the 3rd season of Twin Peaks and going through all of David Lynch's work. And when we got to that flop 1984 Dune adaptation, I just thought, man, people really need to understand what this source material is. It was so nearly incomprehensible as a story. I just felt like it would be fun to go back to that one Frank Herbert novel from 1965 and just put down my thoughts about Dune as a literary work. And I had such a good time, I was like, okay, maybe I'll cover everything that Frank Herbert wrote in the Duneverse. He wrote 6 Dune novels. I'm going to do them all. And so shortly thereafter, I covered the 1969 sequel, Dune Messiah, as well as the trilogy conclusion, 1976's Children of Dune. And then everything went sideways. I'll admit it. Unfortunately, life happens, right? One of the things you'll notice if you go listen to those Books and Nacho shows, I referred to myself as Stuart in LA. Well, that changed. In fact, Children of Dune was probably the last podcast where I ever called myself that. Because as soon as I had recorded that show, I quit my job, I packed up my car, I moved back to the Midwest, and I was no longer Stuart in LA. And reflecting on that time, it was a lot of personal and professional upheaval. I now see it very much as a positive thing in my life. But through all of that tumult, what got lost was the promise that I was going to cover those 3 other books that Frank Herbert wrote about Dune. Things happen. I went back to school, COVID, so many other movies to talk about and cover. Finishing Dune just kind of fell to the bottom of the inbox. But I always knew I'd get back to the Duneverse because these next 3 books are the ones I'm most excited to explore. And why would that be? Well, they are unknown territory, right? We've already had 3 different movies covering Dune 1. And Dune Messiah and Children of Dune were mashed together in a pretty crappy 2003 Sci-Fi Channel miniseries. There have been people that have told those stories on film, but there is no movie of God Emperor of Dune, Heretics of Dune, Chapter House Dune. You can only experience what happens by going to the page. And so that's what I want to do. And while I am anxious to get started and talk about this 4th book, God Emperor of Dune, I recognize it's been a hot minute since the Children of Dune show, and maybe listeners have never heard any of those Books and Nachos shows. It's probably worth my while to take a few minutes and retrace where Paul Atreides and his family have been. Because even though this 4th Dune book is taking place thousands of years after the trilogy, it's not hitting the reset button. You really do kind of have to have a working knowledge of all the characters from the first 3 books in order to even understand what's going on in Book 4. So let me do my most concise recap. Book 1. Paul Atreides is a 15-year-old boy coming of age as his family relocates from watery homeworld Caladan to harsh desert planet Arrakis. And the Padishah Emperor is the most powerful individual in the universe. He has decreed that Paul's family is going to take over spice production. And that's a very important job because everyone in the universe needs this drug, spice. In order for them to perform their work, it is the coffee of the future. You cannot get through a day without it. Spice has to be in everyone's system in order to keep up productivity, and spice can only be mined in the sand dunes of Arrakis. But the Emperor soon gets cold feet about his selection when the Atreides family start getting chummy with the indigenous people of Arrakis, these savage warriors known as Fremen. He basically figures out that, hey, this is a really tough fighting force, and if Paul's family gets in good with them, they would be powerful enough to overthrow me. And so the Emperor conspires with a rival house, House Harkonnen, to have Paul's father Leto killed. And Paul and his mother are actually cast out of the capital and thrown into the sand dunes, which is essentially a death sentence. But Paul thrives in the Arrakis desert because he possesses a unique set of survival skills. Mentats have trained the boy to think with great logic. Duncan Idaho was a mentor that taught him how to fight with a sword, fight hand-to-hand. His father provided great war strategy. His mother gave him Bene Gesserit training, which typically is only provided to girls and women. And most important of all, Paul fits the profile of a local superstition that decreed that an outer space messiah was going to lead the Fremen people to reclaim their planet from colonizers. And Paul is really good at playing this part of prophet because he believes his own hype. He ends up doing so much spice that he's having these visions of his greatness in the future. And so, he believes what the Fremen come to believe, that he is going to take them to a new destiny. And the book ends with 18-year-old Paul marching back to the capital with his Fremen army, kicking some Harkonnen ass, banishing the Emperor, marrying the Emperor's daughter, and sitting on the Imperial throne. Hooray! Happy ending, a real uplift, positive vibes. And then we get to book 2. Woof. Dune Messiah picks up about 12 years later, and Paul's followers have swept through the known universe, basically massacring anyone who refuses to accept Paul as a divine ruler. And we're talking a body count of probably millions, maybe billions, genocide. Entire worlds extinguished, entire religious orders extinguished, because only Paul can be thought of as holy. And 30-year-old Paul is feeling really guilty about all this. A lot of blood on his hands, a lot of death weighing heavy on the crown. And over the course of this story, he just keeps losing. It is a tragedy. I mean, first, he loses his Fremen followers. The very people that put him on the throne feel betrayed for various reasons, and they unite to assassinate him. Paul loses his eyesight in an explosion, and his lover Chani dies giving birth to their twin children. But most importantly, Paul loses faith in himself as a Messiah after having this terrifying vision about what he must do to hold on to power. And Frank Herbert is rather vague in Book 2 about what that is. He just talks about walking a golden path, and that Paul needs to walk a golden path, and Paul doesn't want to walk a golden path. Paul walks into the desert without protective gear and basically is committing suicide at the end of the book. So as uplifting as Book 1 was, Book 2, a real downer. Book 3 is called Children of Dune because it largely focuses on Paul's kids trying to dethrone their evil Aunt Alia. But over the course of that story, you do learn that Paul did not perish when he walked into the sand. He somehow found friends, managed to survive, and 9 years later, he comes walking back into the capital as a blind street preacher, specifically taking aim at his sister Alia for taking his work and turning it into like a megachurch money-making scheme. She basically has ruined, I think he already felt bad about everything he had done in the universe, but she making a buck off of it just makes it worse. So he speaks out against Alia. Alia has him knifed to death in a public square. And so it's for Paul's son Leto II to realize that the only way he's going to get his birthright power away from Alia is to go and fulfill that golden path vision that Paul didn't want to do. And believe me, once you hear about the body modification this kid has to undergo, you're going to understand why Paul chose death by desert. Because most people are not going to do this to themselves. I don't even have piercings or tattoos. I know this is not for me, but as extreme as you think that you could go, I don't know that there's anyone that would willingly want to become the embodiment of the Fremen god Shai-Hulud. That's basically what traveling down the Golden Path requires of Leto. And I promise to explain what that means, but first, a little sidebar. We just need to talk a little bit about Dune flora and fauna for you to appreciate the transformation. In the first 3 Dune books, readers get the impression that Arrakis is this hellish sandscape where it never rains, there's no moisture anywhere, and most of the planet's surface is only inhabitable by these worm-sized whales. But that wasn't always the case. Long ago, the planet was actually covered in lush forests and wide oceans. It had a tropical topography, and that all changed when an invasive species was actually accidentally introduced into the ecosystem, which is a phenomenon we see happen all the time in nature. Actually, just look at the Great Lakes here in America, that we have this Asian carp that appeared there about a decade ago, and now they're killing off all these fish populations. Or murder hornets. I remember that being a headline for a hot minute about 5 years ago. That, there are these insects that are killing off wildlife, changing the pecking order of America's Pacific Northwestern woods. Well, the little buggers that are ruining paradise in Arrakis are called sand trout. And they are these kind of gray, rubbery, but very docile little creatures who live under the sand, but will pop out to latch onto anything that they think will supply them with water. And it's just kind of cute. I mean, kids in ancient times made a game out of it. Like, you're standing there, you see a sand trout, your friend says, go ahead, touch it. You stick your hand, you put it on there, and this dumb creature, it senses blood coursing, inside your body, and it thinks water. So it just tightly seals on your hand like a glove and just squeezes you're going to scream, your friends laugh and point, and eventually the sand trout figures out your water is tainted. The blood products, the things you have in your body, it cannot drink. It's not going to hurt you. So all you got was a good squeeze on your hand. It falls off. It goes off looking elsewhere for what it needs. And it's all fun and games until you realize, oh, it found our oceans. It found the soil. It basically leaches from the entire Arrakis planet all moisture and leaves it as this barren world that has no farmable soil. Doesn't happen overnight. Obviously, we're talking centuries of Arrakis' surface going arid. And as that is happening, there's also an evolution in the sand trout. They become these large, multi-segmented sand worms that no kid, frankly, is going to stick their hand on. Like, that is not a game in the new Arrakis, because these sandworms are killers. They live under the surface of the sand, and if they sense your movement, they will pop out and eat you. Ironically, they're allergic to water. This is kind of something that happened over the course of time. They go from all I want to do is drink water to now it could actually kill me. And all the water they drank as sand trout has been chemically repurposed inside their new worm bodies and has essentially, it's become spice. Spice is what water and worm equal, which is why the native Fremen come to worship worms. They call them Shai Halud, which translates as God of the Sands, because like God, they've given them manna from heaven. Spice is this godsend to the universe. Only worms can make it, and worms can't live anywhere but Arrakis, so they have a very valuable cash crop here. As far as I can tell, there's only two ways to get spice out of the worm. You can either give them a water death. If you drown them, it will spit out a magical elixir known as the Water of Life, which gets used in some religious ceremonies. Or you can be kind and wait for the worm to die a natural death, and their flesh will decompose underneath the ground, just become a large deposit of melange that can be mined from the surface. It's actually very similar to the way dinosaur carcasses turned into petroleum, and now we can lap them up. That what they became is now the dominant energy source of the 20th century. That's also true for worms and spice in this future. And this really leads to the major quandary for the people of Arrakis. They have this ecologist, Liet Kynes, who, promotes the idea that they could change their topography, but there's difficulty either direction they go. They either have this unlivable desert climate and a monopoly on the substance everyone needs, or you restore this place to a lush paradise with no spice, because worms can't live there, and then everyone has to go back to the old ways. And I just want to remind folks that we take spice because we need to do the work of computers and machines. In the old ways, which is, I guess, our near future, there's some kind of machine revolt, and it caused wars and problems and a Butlerian jihad. But all of this gets wiped away when Paul's son Leto, he fixes everything when he decides to lie down in the sand at the end of Book 3 and embrace the Golden Path vision his father couldn't abide. What happens are sand trout, there's still a few of them here in Arrakis, they find him, crawl over every inch of his body, and fuse together to form this powerful new skin. A worm suit of armor, if you will, that kind of works in sync to enhance his human anatomy. Suddenly, like, Leto's legs are strong, and he can move faster, and he can take these mile-long leaps and travel all across the surface of Arrakis in record time, and he can just destroy all of his Aunt Alia's water reserves and munitions. And his skin is also protective. So when she strikes back at him with bombs and lasers, they really don't have any effect. And ultimately, Alia has to give up. She even kills herself. So again, it sounds like Book 3 is bringing us back to the feel-good vibes, the happy ever after ending of book one. It's the end of a trilogy, except, this is an important detail here, you just can't take away someone's beliefs and not have something to replace it, right? Alia might have created a sham religion, but it is the belief system of an entire universe. And if she's dead, you have to be the belief system. You have to commit. And that's what Leto really does. He's already changed his body, but now he is going to become their God Emperor of Dune, which is the title of this book 4 that I'm now going to start talking about. Okay, so we're caught up. More than 3,500 years have passed since Alia has been defeated, and that fused sand trout skin has not only kept Leto II alive, it has continued to alter his body in even more surprising ways than before. I mean, keep in mind, he was a 9-year-old boy that had sand trout on him when he started the Golden Path. And now, well, his torso has widened. It's lengthened to about 22 feet. Those strong legs I talked about, they've actually withered into these useless little flippers. You want to take a selfie with Leto, from the front? You're going to recognize his pink face, his piercing blue eyes. But if you go for a full body shot, you're going to see that he has become a human sandworm hybrid. God Emperor Leto is a big, bulky sandworm, like the monsters that will eat you if you go out into the dunes. And he's so massive that he gets around by laying on a rolling cart. I mean, he really just is this grotesque figure, I think. It's what I imagine. I'll put it that way. Frank Herbert is normally a very wordy storyteller, but he's notably vague on physical descriptions of Leto's new look. And I think there's a logic to it. Because, you tell me main character turned into worm, I've got a lot of questions. Anatomical questions. I want to know, what are we talking about? What are we looking at? And I think Herbert doesn't want you to focus on that. He wants you to judge this Leto on his words more than what his sacrifice has made him look like. And, Leto does this trick. Whenever he's meeting anyone new, he turns off the lights. And they have a long conversation before light turned on and suddenly, I'm staring at this thing that no one in the whole world looks like. You might get a better idea if you look at some of the covers. I noticed on mine that they really emphasize that this worm is massive, like, skyscraper tall, like dwarfs human beings. Again, it's only about 22 feet on the page. Standing upright, he's still smaller than a T-Rex. If you've seen those movies, he's not exactly as dominating as these paintings on the cover would have you believe. But I do think Leto's dominance in the universe is that big. It makes sense that you think of him as so massive because of the way he's really subjugated everyone. Honestly, the visual I kept returning to was Jabba the Hutt. I think the reason why Frank Herbert doesn't give descriptions is he just wants you to come up with your own concept. But I just kept going back to Star Wars, the toady creature that took Han Solo captive. It makes you wonder, though. When you think about Return of the Jedi, that wouldn't come out for 2 years after God Emperor of Dune was published. There's even like a worm creature in the sand that eats people. I have to believe that George Lucas was aware, probably had read this book. Maybe there is some kind of inspiration for his Muppet crime lord here in the page. But you really shouldn't think about Jabba the Hutt, because I thought that character was charming and Leto was way more complex. Partly because his transformation is even weirder than how he looks. I mentioned Paul Atreides is still a character in Book 4, which must have some of you wondering, didn't you tell me he got knifed in Book 3 and that 3,500 years have passed? How is he still around? Well, this is another trick of the worm. Death just doesn't keep family apart. Paul is hanging out inside the worm body and can be summoned at will. In fact, the spirit of every Atreides ruler who has ever been is stuffed in this fat worm body, kind of like mystery meat in a sausage. So I think it's probably helpful to stop thinking of God Emperor as an individual wearing a sand trout suit. He really is a family tree come to life. And when you address him, Leto can decide he's going to answer you back in the voice of Paul. Or maybe in the voice of Leto I, who we haven't heard from since he was assassinated in Book 1. It is this entire royal bloodline, a groupthink repository. And I think it's only a boys' club. I do not hear any evidence of Paul retaining his mother Jessica or his Leto sister Ghanima. They're not invited to speak. I think it is only men. But again, imagine having all your relatives there with you in this inhuman body. It's hard to imagine the impact that's going to have on anyone's psyche. But I think it's supposed to make him a better ruler. Theoretically, having quick access to your ancient ties, you're going to be able to know what happened in the past. And then, you have all your spice visions that are supposedly telling you everything that's going to happen in the future. And so really, that working together should make you understand a universal timeline. And so you can now, as a God Emperor, make the choices that are going to keep mankind in line, that is going to keep them walking this metaphorical golden path, because all that has been and all that will be. And I think that's how Leto sees his job. I'm just wanting everyone to live their best lives and achieve their full potential as a species. Some of the things he says makes me believe that's what he wants. And that makes him sound like Oprah Winfrey, but I'm telling you, he's not popular like Oprah Winfrey. I doubt many readers are going to find him as charming or inspirational, because Leto is a paradox. He is enforcing tranquility by being a tyrant. And that is what makes him so interesting. Probably not a surprise. I've already mentioned I would be damaged having to live with my relatives inside a worm body. He's not dealing with these changes very well. He's very moody. He's prone to bouts of impulsivity, of rage. One minute he can be laughing with his subjects and taking in bad news and not seeming to care, and then being enraged and just suddenly, even sometimes so displeased he'll just kill someone on the spot. Temperamental. And don't let the fact that he looks like a slug make you think that he moves like a slug. He can be very quick if needed. The beginning of this novel, it starts with a servant pulling out a gun and going rogue and trying to kill the worm. And that's a double no-no, because obviously we want loyal subjects, and you're not even supposed to touch machines. Again, a laser gun is considered a machine. Well, he shoots off the flipper of the God Emperor, but seconds later, the big thing is rolling off his cart and crushing him with his body weight, and it's got everyone talking. It really is the inciting incident that has everyone that knows about it a bit shaken, because here's the thing. God Emperor is supposed to be able to see everything in the future. So why didn't he see this assassin coming for him? It was almost too late. This guy, if he had known where to aim, he probably could have killed God Emperor. But, it's funny. Frank Herbert wrote this book in 1981, but it's amazing how these gossiping servants sound like 2024 political commentators. Is God Emperor too old? Is he senile? Boy, he's so angry and cranky and petty and mean. But, of course, God Emperor is not an elected official. This is an important part of the story. There is no democracy here. These people haven't chosen him. He chose to become God Emperor to serve them. And one of the things I really appreciate about Book 4 is how prominent it makes the theme of monarchy. If you look at the Dune saga, the previous 3 books, they're just filled with all these different ideas about science and theology and government and all of that, and it's hard to get your hands around. And here, I really feel like Herbert has pulled the focus on some core questions, one-man rule stuff. How does an individual bend a universe to his will? And does that make you a tyrant or a god if you're successful at doing it? What sacrifices have to be made in order to wield such almighty power? These are really, they've always been questions in the Duneverse, but I really feel like they're pertinent and really more central because our Messiah now is just such an extreme. Which is not to say that God Emperor of Dune is a fun beach read. Because it is more focused does not mean that you can follow it with ease. I actually find that this is probably the most challenging book of the series. It's so dense and philosophical, and frankly, not a lot happens. This is a story where much gets said and little actually gets done for 422 pages. And it's downbeat, too. I mean, book 2 was a downer, but this is twice as long. And, it's got more of monologues and less of, there are assassination plots, but I do feel like the conspiratorial adventure story that we've gotten, certainly in book 1 and book 3, is long gone. It will leave you with a lot of questions and more than answers. I mean, I'm still processing everything that I've read after 2 reads. And so that's how I'm going to structure this review. I'm going to ask questions. I'll start with a basic one. Why? Why did he do it? Why did Leto do this to his body? Why didn't he at least take the sand trouts off after he defeated Alia? Did he have to remain and turn into this, the word gets used a lot, so I'm going to use it too, abomination? I'll admit, again, because I don't have tats and piercings, I'm not attracted to changing my physical form, but I do recognize that if I wanted to be God to all the universe, I'd have to dress the part, right? And I do think that egotism is a driving factor for Leto. I do think he likes being worshipped. I think it's pretty clear when you're reading these chapters. Almost every one of them has a parade or a party or a ceremony done in honor of God Emperor Leto. Would you become a worm just to have everyone love you? All I can say is it didn't play so well for Paul. Leto's father, he didn't even have to wash his hair. First of all, he didn't have to turn into a worm. He didn't have to groom himself. Everyone called him Messiah. It didn't make him happy. And there are easier ways of getting attention. So it can't just be about making people love you, because the Atreides line already had that. Then halfway through this book, I get to this one ritual called the Feast of Syanok. And it had me coming up with a different theory about why he did it. I mean, just to borrow a popular song line, did he do it all for the nookie? Does going worm get you chicks? You laugh, but God Emperor has an all-female security detail. He is surrounded at all times by these buff, nearly naked women that worship at his feet. They call them the fish speakers. And the way that he makes them prove their loyalty to him is this very kinky spin on Catholic communion. If you think about taking the wafer and drinking the grape juice, how it's supposed to turn into Jesus's flesh and blood in your mouth. Well, I mentioned that worms make spice. Leto actually excretes these spice wafers, and all these women are asked to eat them. And so they're really eating a part of him. And after they've done that, he now calls them brides. They are married to him, it just feels like such a pimp move. I mean, I don't even know if Leto has balls. They might have dropped off in the last 3,000 years, but he's certainly getting his rocks off by having all these women eat a part of his body. And it's just, I don't know, it's kinky and it's weird, and maybe that's a reason enough. I mean, he does kind of look like a giant phallus. if size is the only thing that matters, Leto wins. He's the stud of the universe. But, can he actually be sexual? Can he actually gratify all of these wives that are surrounding him? I mean, it is speculated. Throughout this novel, we will have several characters wonder aloud how a worm could mate with a human form. Is he still human enough to do something like that? Ick, right? But, I mean, it is an important question as people debate about legacy and his ability to be human. I don't get the sense that there's much optimism that God Emperor is going to be able to sire a child or even satisfy a woman. Now, the most popular theory going around about why Leto became a worm has nothing to do with his virility. They assume he did it so that he could have eternal life. And he's been around a while. I mean, it should be said that God Emperor says he is immortal. Spice does allow you to live over 100 years. I think humans can have, triple digits, but no one is blowing out 3,608 candles, which is what God Emperor is doing at the start of this novel. So maybe that tracks, right? If everyone dies, rots away, becomes worm food, you're going to survive by being the worm. You're going to outlast them all. You'll be there to devour them. Maybe that's appealing. God knows I want to live a healthy life. I always feel I qualify that. I don't want to live forever if it means being in a vegetative state or not in full possession of my body. Going worm, I don't know that I'd want to live like that. No, I know I wouldn't want to live like that, but maybe that is the reason. That seems to be what most of the haters think. He just wants to live forever and oppress us forever. But I think the real reason that comes out, what we really learn about why Leto undergoes this dramatic metamorphosis, is that it allows him to secure a monopoly on spice. In the past, anyone that was crazy enough to go into the Arrakis desert and put down a drill could get spice, you gotta watch out for worms, but there were the official chome miners, and then there are black market operations as well. But the people that are brave and crazy can get this drug, but not in this future. God Emperor Leto has taken all of that off the table because he has allowed the planet to revert back to the tropical state I talked about when I talked about flora and fauna. The oceans are back, the forests are back at the start of this novel. Leto can handle all this moisture and new climate because he's still part human, but all the other worms can't, and so they die off. And once they die, sure, you can mine up their bodies for that spice, but once that's gone, you only have one option for getting more spice, and that is Leto. So again, let me reemphasize that spice, nobody can do anything in this universe. If you don't have computers and you got to do the work of computers, if you want to move cargo across the galaxy, if you want to rule and solve logic problems, math problems, computations, I think even if you want to work the front counter of McDonald's, there's no cash register. Again, a machine. You are going to need spice. And so whether you believe that God Emperor is in fact divine or not, you will bow down to him. Because if you don't, he cuts you off, right? He's a drug dealer. The big reason why the streets of Arrakeen are lined with sycophants chanting his name is not because they're worm crazy. It's because, they want to be able to get their fix. And so, I don't know, it's kind of cool, right? I mean, it's the moxie of that. I mean, I'm super impressed with how having a worm body allows him to have this unprecedented level of clout, unseen by any government we've ever seen throughout the world. Any religious figure, nobody has been able to have this much control over this many people. I mean, think about it. Most people who hold a political office, whether they're elected or not, they need to have a certain segment of their base happy, or they'll be deposed, right? I mean, that's just the way it works. You have to influence somebody to have a popular opinion of you. But Leto can just literally tell everyone off. He can literally just say to every single person in the universe, eat my shit. And they do, gladly. I mean, he's just going to squirt out spice and they're going to lap it up. This is the image I have thinking about what society is reduced to. And it's not really positive. Kind of sad to think about. This is the state of things. Leto compares all of this to conducting an orchestra. That's how he sees himself, is that he is leading society through this musical symphony. It's more micromanaging than that, right? I mean, like, conductors, they allow people to play their own instruments. They allow people to do their own things. But really here, nobody can do anything without him knowing about it, because he knows exactly how much spice is needed to perform each task. He's only going to produce that much spice for you. You're not going to be able to stockpile it. You're not going to be able to use it against him. So you're all tied to him. Like everyone is a puppet on a string. That's what it feels like. Puppet master more than conductor. So my next question, I think it's probably got an obvious answer, but it's worth asking, is how are folks dealing with Leto ruling them in this way? How does it feel to be walking this quote-unquote golden path? Not well. No surprise, right? Lots of pissed off people walking around Arrakis, and I presume the other planets. I wouldn't know because this novel doesn't go to any other planet. We are marooned here on Arrakis. What I hear from whispers and gossip, people come there to beg for spice. So we know about their homeworlds from what they're saying. It sounds like things have really devolved, regressed, that people aren't in communication with one another. They can't travel different places. I mean, if you think about setting up that kind of limitation, it just sounds creatively like people aren't going to thrive. And it seems like most of the societies that we've known, these great houses, these cool sort of figures in previous novels that we've been impressed with, if not liked, at least admired their influence. It hurts to see how reduced they are, how humbled they are, that they're paupers here. To take, for example, the Bene Gesserit, who are a society of spice-using witches. I mean, that's the word commonly used, but it's primarily a means for women to obtain power. Women, they can't really sit on the throne. They have to influence the throne by being in the Bene Gesserit. So every royal court has one of them. They usually consult the rulers. They usually make the marriage matches that unify dynasties. They even have like the magic powers of making babies have certain properties. If you want a boy or a girl, they can make that happen, or they used to. But God Emperor took all that away. They took away the birthing program and they deposed all these other rulers. So they're now influencers of nothing. Like they have no real purpose. We'll meet these two Reverend Mothers who travel to Arrakis, and they just have to grovel at God Emperor's flippered feet for their spice. And he seems to take a little bit of joy in their misery. Honestly, they have to stand in the back of the line, that they have to stay in substandard accommodations. I think there's a part of him that feels satisfied in seeing, these women humbled. And who's got it even worse are the Fremen. Again, the person that made, way back in the day, Paul get to the throne. The reason why we're at this point is because Fremen united behind House Atreides. Well, they've lost their entire culture. When they lost their deserts, water was their currency. They went to elaborate extremes to conserve it and to retain it. They would suck it out of dead bodies and wear still suits that allowed them to reprocess their own sweat, perspiration. Well, now, they look around, everything has a lake, a river, and ironically, they're all named after their occupiers. They used to forge knives out of worm teeth. Well, now they have to fight with plastic versions because there are no more worms to provide those teeth. Leto calls them museum fremen because that's kind of what they are. Their life feels largely performative. They keep up the old ways by living in this sandbox reservation, not unlike the Native American experience. They have this very small patch of land in which, they still put on the still suits. They still perform historical reenactments for tourists, but they are greatly reduced from the noble warrior hunters that we met in book 1. So the next question to ask is anyone benefiting from being on this golden path? Is this golden path really just a walk of shame? I think there is one group doing well. The Ixians. Might remember them more from Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. I don't think that they're in the first Dune novel, but they are sort of the dark wizards of this world. They were allowed to play with machines. Machines are outlawed for everybody else, but they, take that forbidden technology and combine it with spice, and they've been able to do some incredible things. Some of them have actually become face dancers, which means they can shapeshift. And some of them, if you remember Seidel from book 2, he was a villain. He thought he could influence Paul, Dune Messiah Paul, by manufacturing a clone of his old swordmaster, Duncan Idaho. And that was a big subplot in book 2, was that Duncan came back from the dead, and do we treat him as a zombie, or do we think of him as a continuation of the man that Paul loved? Well, believe it or not, that practice is still happening. In the year 3508, Leto is still human enough to be sentimental, and he misses his Atreides friends. He's got all his dads and rulers inside of him, but the servants are gone, and so he really wants the Ixians to still have their machines and produce facsimiles of Duncan Idaho. This is a really cool invention of Frank Herbert. I really think it helps readers who are going to be stunned by this world. I mean, I'm just aghast at how different things feel in book 4 than any other time we've seen Arrakis. Having a character we know helps us orientate to it. It tells us how to feel about what we're reading. Not to say that I thought Duncan Idaho was my favorite character from book 1. Paul had a lot of mentors, and he didn't really stand out. But, if you've seen the recent movie, this character is fun-loving Jason Momoa. The only one that likes to smile. It's a cast full of glum faces. And he's a badass with a knife as well. He has personality in a way that feels very relatable. I can understand why God Emperor wants him around. And Duncan did die delivering Paul from danger. And so, his loyalty to the House Atreides is unquestioned. I mean, we know he's willing to lay down his life for people that he loves. So when he gets a peek at this worm, who is claiming he is the embodiment of all the people that Duncan should love, will he serve it? Would Duncan take a bullet for a creature who looks and acts like this, and who burns through Duncan Idaho's like a smoker burns through a pack of cigarettes? Because, again, there have been 9 previous versions of Duncan Idaho. The one we're meeting at the start of this novel is Duncan number 10. And there's this unfortunate pattern that happens. God Emperor, I'm so sad, I'm so lonely, bring me a Duncan. And Duncan begins the process of serving. Eventually, without fail, he realizes that this worm is not like his people and will actually try to assassinate the worm. That ultimately God Emperor has to put him down and order a new one is like this really unhealthy codependency is the way that I look at it. It's helpful to have this guy because he is drawn in the tradition of other great dystopian protagonists. If you think about Brave New World, he's John the Savage. He's someone outside of this that can be very critical when he's reborn and asked to contemplate, do you want this as a future? You fought so hard to get the Atreides family entrenched in Arrakis. Is this what you wanted? I mean, again, I think it's really cool that Frank Herbert has found a way to bring a classic character into this very unclassic, horrifying Arrakis world of Book 4. So most of this novel, I'm sitting around waiting for Duncan 10 to flip, right? He is going to follow the pattern and try to assassinate this worm. And, Leto is not sweet-talking him. He's not charming him. He's not trying to convince him that life is going to be good here. He makes it very difficult. You should remember that Duncan is very much an old-school macho man. So when he is given the task of being put in charge of security, that means he now has to lead an army of half-naked women into battle. And yeah, he's just got a problem with that. He's, culturally speaking, doesn't know how to lead that. And yeah, on top of that, many of these fish speakers are butch lesbians, and some of them probably can bench more than he can, and it's just a hard assignment for him. And on top of that, what is their job? They have to defend this worm rolling down on a cart, going down on the parade from shapeshifters. Many of the assassins in this novel are Ixians that can change their appearance. So one minute you have autograph hounds running up trying to mob the cart, and the next minute they're producing a bomb and trying to kill the worm. And it's your job to stop them at all costs. Duncan is never sure who he's looking at and whether it's friend or foe. And he doesn't think that he has standing with the people that are fighting alongside him. Does not even really sure that he wants to preserve God Emperor the more that it goes. But I think the thing that is hardest for him, honestly, is when Leto asks him to get engaged, that he wants him to marry his great-great-great-great-great-great grandniece, Siona Atreides, who is a descendant of Leto's twin sister Ghanima, and who is openly leading a rebellion against God Emperor. This novel actually begins with Siona breaking into a warehouse, looking for where Leto keeps all his spice, because the thinking is if we can get his spice reserves, we can whack him. And she's with 11 other people. They all get torn to bits by these guard dogs known as D-Wolves, but she gets away, and she seems to have this almost supernatural quality about being evasive, that she can go undetected. And that's kind of what Leto likes about her, is that, he has premonition. He can supposedly see the future, sees all of the past, sees everything. And she has a way of ducking in and out of his visions. And he thinks that's an important quality he can use. And so he wants to draw her closer. His way of doing that is having her get engaged with the Duncan clone. And so, yeah, time for another question. Why would God Emperor risk that? I get that you want to keep your enemies close, but you actually want the guy that's the head of your security to fall in love with a terrorist who is out to kill God Emperor? I mean, that is risky. I really think that is almost bordering on unbelievable. I wouldn't suspect a normal ruler of encouraging such behavior. Because keep in mind, he's telling Duncan, do what she says. And many times other servants as well. Do what this terrorist says. And if she says, try to kill me, you should try to kill me. And I mean, what is that about? I mean, why would you do that? And Siona, it should be said, is not into Duncan either. She is not attracted to him. She does not like the idea of being ordered to marry who this worm tells her to. And they have a romantic tryst where they're sent away to a Fremen colony. Sparks do not fly. Things never get cozy between them. She's much more committed to bringing down God Emperor than finding a boyfriend. So this matchmaking is not going to work out. But one thing I notice as this book goes along is that Leto just likes drama, right? In the end, he is really in love with the idea of putting people in boxes. He wants to challenge their conflicting loyalties. It makes me think about really the first chapter of the first Dune book, where Paul was asked to put his hand in a box full of pain, and could he hold it there? I feel like he fell in love with that kind of temptation and is kind of putting all his servants through a similar test. He's bored, To boil it down, if you see everything, if you have the premonition of all future events, then everything is kind of not fun anymore, right? You know what's going to happen. What joy do you get out of going through the motions? In some ways, Leto is just trying to wake himself up. If I can put people in a situation where they're going to react unpredictably, I can experience the joy of surprise once again, which is, I think, something that has made him, really depressed, is that he knows or thinks he knows all that will be and just has to live through it. So yeah, he is putting all of his servants and people around him in these impossible situations, asking them to do things that they don't know how to interpret, and then having fun wondering whether they'll come back at him, try to kill him, what they're going to do, how they will show loyalty to him, and conflicting ideas. I think I'm doing a really good job of painting God Emperor of Dune as an asshole, and I think in many ways he is, but I do want to just let people know, if you're worried about revulsion, will I be angry every time I'm turning the page? Frank Herbert writes with a lot more nuance. This character on the page, he has this other servant named Moneo, who is actually Siona's dad, and he really helped me understand that there's a human in here. The worm, at least according to Moneo, is the nasty one. He's the one you got to watch out for. But Leto has some moments as a, empathetic human being still. And the thought is, really from Moneo, is as the years go on and the human body parts fall further and further away, it's even said that his brain has actually broken apart and spread through his body in little nodules. He's just losing human physical form. Will he lose his human emotions? Will he be subsumed by this worm and be unrelatable? When he does that, will he be an abuser? Because I think Moneo puts up with a lot, but he still really does believe in the mission of God Emperor, that God Emperor is trying to lead humanity in an important direction. And I think it's important to hold that in your hand, even though it sounds like, again, this guy is a tyrant. This guy is super controlling and mean. And I think Siona also does an important job of helping me see humanity in Leto, because she has a subplot where God Emperor kind of takes her hostage and they ride out into the last patch of desert on Arrakis. Again, everything is tropical except this 150-mile expanse of sand. And you think it's going to be another malicious test. He's like, you need to be able to survive out here and find your way home. Can you tap into your ancient Fremen survival skills? But it's not just a test. I think what he knows, what we will ultimately realize is he knows that his time is limited. He knows that he's not going to live forever, and that at some point his ride on the golden path ends. He wants to prepare people for everything to change back to the way it was. When he dies, Arrakis will be sand again, and Siona needs to know how to live in that. And so it actually feels like a loving act that this woman that is so hell-bent on bringing about that future be properly prepared for it. And there's also a love interest. I mentioned that God Emperor has lots of wives that are his security detail, but he actually has a fiancée as well. Hui Nori, I think I'm saying that right. She's actually the ambassador to the Ixians. They made her in a lab specifically designed to be sexually irresistible. The hope is that she can use her feminine wiles to make God Emperor Leto more susceptible to their demands. And these two do get engaged over the course of the novel, and the climax of the books is actually them processing into a chapel where they are to be wed. And as much as I don't want to imagine the honeymoon fireworks, the novel is going to stop before we get there, I do think that Hui is important for helping us see that she's the one best able to bring out love and compassion from this worm. Again, we see that he truly does have romantic feelings erotic feelings. He says things to her that lets her know that he cares about people. And so, yeah, she's really important to softening the tyrant within and restoring the dignity of Atreides that, again, may have been largely lost in this future. So that's it. Basically, this fourth book is a story of all these players, attendants, advisors, relatives, enemies, circling a worm, and some want to better understand him so that they can wound him, hurt him, end his rule, and then others, they want to help him rule better. They want him to understand how some are suffering and how he might adjust things to their betterment. And so everyone wants a piece of this worm, and we get a lot of speeches about what he's thinking at any given moment. I don't want to give away the ending, because I do just think readers need to come to their own conclusions. It's kind of ambiguous, but it's pretty clear that there is an end. I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying that God Emperor's rule will come to a very definite conclusion. This book feels very much like a summation of everything we've seen House Atreides doing for 4 novels. And what comes next? We got 2 more books. It's got to look very different. I haven't read them yet, but I can tell by the way that this comes to conclusion. Leto has tried to solve a paradox. Again, he's in love with these paradoxes. He wants to be able to give people a future where they have free will, and at the same time where they're going to be kept on a golden path that has felt pretty rigid. And maybe that is the proper way to live. But how do you have free will and trust people to stay on the right path? I don't think we know if he can be successful at that until we get to Book 5, Heretics of Dune. And so I guess in conclusion, the final question of the day is, well, did I like God Emperor of Dune? Do I recommend that you read it and get to Book 5? Are people that are casual fans of the movies going to relate to what's here on the page? Or if you're reluctant to absorb too much lore, are you best to stay away? I mean, I consider myself someone that does tune out when there is too much backstory. I don't know, I found this novel to be quite unique and compelling. I read it twice. I read it back in 2017. I read it again. I wouldn't be surprised if I read it a third time. I mean, I feel like I'm still unpacking mysteries. I've never read a political novel so deeply rooted in body horror before. Like, that's a really compelling combination for me. And I've never seen a king so successful, really, at enslaving the masses, and yet I don't hold it against him. Like, I might still think that he is a good guy or doing it for the right reasons. He's complicated, and I appreciate the complexity and the nuance that's on every page. So I would say that if you're up for a challenge, if you want to do the work, this book is rewarding. Its pleasures are intellectual, though. It is not a lot of things happening. You know, like I can point to things in the earlier novels that are just exciting. That doesn't really happen here. It's a slow slog where many times I had to go back and reread. I mean, rereading things, I'm going to go ahead and read a passage. You tell me, does this make sense to you? Is this brilliance or fortune cookie absurdity? Quote, "You should never be in the company of anyone with whom you would not want to die." I mean, it sounds cool. I mean, like, if you say that the right way, that, yeah, words to live by. Good advice, I think. Except, does it really matter that you die with people you don't like? Because you're dead. Like, are you going to be stuck in purgatory with them? Like, are you telling me something about the afterlife I don't know? I spent so much time trying to unpack doublespeak. And sometimes I was annoyed. But always I was compelled to read on. You know who should play God Emperor if they ever make the movie, and I don't think they ever will. Denis Villeneuve has said he's stopping after book 2, and I just don't see Hollywood. I just don't see pretty boys like Timothée Chalamet suiting up to play worms. But you know who would have been a great one? Marlon Brando. I think about Apocalypse Now and his Colonel Kurtz. That I think it was an influence in this novel, honestly. I think that movie would have come out in 1979, right around the time that Frank Herbert was starting to think about, how do I make a follow-up to Children of Dune? Yeah. Apocalypse Now, just to take folks back, like after Martin Sheen has traveled down the river and seen all the exciting chopper raids and the tiger and the spears and the Playboy bunny, he's got like an hour of sitting with crazy, bald, fat Marlon Brando, listening to things that are half brilliant and half cracked, right? And trying to decide whether he should just kill this guy or find some other way to deliver him from his fevered, crazed jungle mind. Yeah, Brando has that repellent but beatific godlike quality in that movie. And in thinking about so many of the exchanges in God Emperor of Dune, because there's just so much monologuing, it does feel like that last hour of that movie. So a good litmus test. Did you like the last part of Apocalypse Now? If you hated it, don't read this book. If you were intrigued or remain unsure, or if you're like me and didn't think, it was somewhat disappointing as the conclusion to a very exciting action movie, but it had its own merits, I think you'll find that this has some merits as well. The lessons of God Emperor are enigmatic. I think I can draw the conclusion that monarchy is ultimately unhealthy for society and the monarch, and at the same time that great rulers have to endure a lot of personal sacrifice to wear the crown, that we need to have that perspective that Leto, maybe more than anybody else, to achieve all that power, he had to punish the world and himself. And ultimately, that's how I conceptualize this story. That's what it means to me. This is a cautionary tale about fame and getting what you want. A family that wanted to rule so badly, to sit on that throne. What is it like to live with that? I think Frank Herbert knew something about that in 1981. One thing I do as I'm reading each book, I'm also going back to Dreamer of Dune, which is a Frank Herbert biography written by his son Brian. And it helps me understand, Brian was around as his father was writing each book. What is the up and close personal insights that he can offer going on in the author's life at that time? Yeah, I think Frank Herbert was kind of plagued by a fan base cult at this point. They treated his words like he was some kind of messiah. And I think sometimes he enjoyed that. He liked the celebrity of that. And then other times, Brian talks about how they couldn't go to their favorite family restaurant anymore because they'd be mobbed by crazy people, that Dad actually had to move away from the family farm in Oregon and go live in Hawaii. And I also think Hawaii sounds kind of like the tropical Arrakis that we're reading about on the page. I do think that Frank Herbert saw a lot of himself in this self-loathing worm that was a god to so many and a tyrant to so many as well. Keep in mind, he had difficult relationships with all of his children. I think one of the reasons why we get so much about Duncan Idaho and his ethics about homosexuality and the fish speakers is because Frank Herbert was really upset that his youngest son, Bruce, had come out as a gay advocate. And I think that he was also estranged from Brian, the author of the biography, that the story of them coming together kind of mirrors the story of Siona Atreides and how she wanted to kill the worm, but ultimately kind of is his disciple. I don't want to spoil the ending, but she may be inheriting his kingdom by the end. It was certainly true for Brian Herbert. Brian Herbert will actually write all of the Dune novels that follow the 6 that Frank wrote. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I have not committed to reading every Dune book ever written. And in fact, I doubt that will ever happen. Let's just stick to finishing the original goal of reading all 6. I've finished with 4, and I'm excited to see what the future is going to be now that we're moving on to Book 5, Heretics of Dune. Before I go, I just want to thank all of you for riding this big worm with me. It's been a real struggle to get back on and get this show together, but I'm grateful to have an audience. Hopefully, this has helped you appreciate the rich and vast universe that Frank Herbert created. Maybe I've even enticed a few of you to go read the pages. If not, hopefully I've just entertained you while you wait for our movie review of Dune Chapter 2, which will be coming shortly, as soon as medically possible. And I hope you can join us for everything that Now Playing is doing in the near future. We've also got the French Connection trilogy that we're unspooling in the next few weeks, 2 more Dune books in the next few weeks, Dune Chapter 2 in the next few weeks. Keep reading. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to Now Playing Podcast Book Reviews. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. In the archives at nowplayingpodcast.com, you can find more than 150 more book reviews, including many of the works of Stephen King, the Ian Fleming Bond books, the Planet of the Apes novels, Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, and many more. This episode of Now Playing Podcast Book Reviews is copyright 2024, Venganza Media Incorporated, all rights reserved. And no part of this show may be reproduced, repurposed, redistributed, or modified without the express permission of Venganza Media Incorporated.